Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. All right, folks, welcome to Disruption Lab. I've got a treat for you today. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And typically I don't do this at the intro for a podcast episode, but I ask you to indulge me for a moment. I'm going to read you the description of the book we're going to talk about so you can learn a little bit more about the guest. And I don't want to leave anything out. So here's what it says. It says, you can just do things. How high agency people get what they want out of life. Goes on to say, you've been taught success comes from careful planning, learning the ropes, and earning one promotion at a time. But what about the people who seem to skip all that? We all know a few rare individuals who never stop moving, taking wild risks and collecting public failures, yet somehow always seem to land on top. Cate Hall, my guest today, is one of those maddening, inspiring people. She left an elite legal career just before making partner to gamble for a living. She became the #1 female professional poker player in the world. Then a drug addiction left her broke and brain damaged. But a year after that, she emerged from it. She co-founded a biotech startup that set a clinical trial speed record. Not long after that, she took the helm of one of the world's largest philanthropic foundations. So why don't the rules apply to her? What if they didn't apply to you either? In her book, You Can Just Do Things, she argues that the so-called quote-unquote rules of success aren't rules at all. They're productivity guidelines for low agency people. Hall shows readers how to live with agency and take control. And in doing so, she shares a few things that we talk about today. How do you increase your surface area for luck? How do you take every shortcut available? How do you build forcing functions that ensure commitment? And how do you use your deepest insecurities as fuel for growth? Trust me, you're going to want to grab something to write with as Cate Hall and I talk about her new book, You Can Just Do Things. How high agency people get what they want out of life. Hey, Cate, welcome to Disruption Lab.
Hey, Patrick, thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining us. I was telling you before we started recording that I was really excited as the more I dug into your background and the book you have coming out and all the things you're doing. I'm like, I want to talk to Cate. And I almost caused myself to say, stop researching so that you don't get so far down this rabbit hole that it all of a sudden becomes too formulaic. So with that said, I'm going to actually, if you don't mind, indulge me for just a second. I want to share something with you and then see how you react to it.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
All right. So some people may or may not know from listening to podcasts or reading things I've written. I've been a professor at Vanderbilt for a number of years. And one class I taught was leading business through times of crisis. And in one section of that class, I would have different guest speakers come in. So all sorts of different guest speakers, mostly ran businesses, things like that. And one time I had this gentleman come into the room named James Patterson. And people are familiar with James Patterson if they've walked planet Earth for a while because he's changed forever the publishing industry. But I was a little surprised how he started off with the students. Now, first he looked at them and he said, "Hi, I'm Stephen King," which was a pretty funny opening line. It kind of got him like, what? And then he said this. He asked him this question. He said, "Are you living a good life?" He said, I want you to live a good life. He said, "I'm living a good life, and I'm going to share with you how I went about doing it." And he called the presentation that day, The Power of Disruption. And he talked about the ups and downs in his life. And, sometimes it's really easy to see the ups in life because those are the things we tend to promote and talk about. I had students over the years say, "Professor Ledden, how can I be more like you?" And they'd look at my resume and I'd say, "Let me tell you about the stuff that's not highlighted in my resume." So I'm just curious, just with that as a launching point for our discussion, talk to us a little bit about living a good life.
Oh, such a broad topic. So great question. Um, Multiple places that I could start with this.
Let's
I
just
think
roll.
I think where I want to start is this is basically how the introduction to my book, which I have coming out soon, is structured. So I I write about agency, personal agency, and there are like two versions of my resume that you can think about, either one of which is sort of appropriate for an introduction of a book on agency. So the first one is like the LinkedIn version of my life, which is like Supreme Court lawyer, top poker player, biotech person, like all of the positions of power that I've held. And I think it's like it's quite tempting for people, especially when they see me in a conference or something like that, to think that is the version of my life that is relevant. I think the other version is the like drug addict, recovered drug addict version, the constantly messing things up in life and figuring out how to overcome them, burning out of and switching careers multiple times. I think that I have an incredible life now because I have failed catastrophically at so many different points. And I've gotten sort of accustomed to that. I've learned to enjoy the process of failure. And I think there was a long time in my life where I felt really uncomfortable saying that meaning in life comes from overcoming obstacles, because I think there's like a survivorship bias where I don't want to say that my experience is representative. It's not always good to suffer, but it just really seems to be true when I look at my life and the lives of people around me, that so much meaning does come from having to overcome things in life, that a life without struggle is not a very full life.
Yeah, it's so true. We talk about, and I as I was researching this idea of being what we call positive disruptors in life, people who take the curveballs in life and try to use them as fertile ground for something new and different. That there is, we often talk about people are wired to disrupt, and we have big brains. We can come up with new and engaging ideas and begin to generate those. But the second one is our experiences wire us to disrupt. And granted, the highs and lows might be different, if relatively different among people, but everybody to some degree has had those journeys where you get the low point, you lose the job, or you lose the job because of nothing you did necessarily, just something changed economically, or you lost the job because of something you did. Talk about agency, I did it, type of thing. So there's those moments. There's the health situations. There's all these different things that create the lows, but then oftentimes, almost magically, but it's not magically, but these high points come on the other side of those. Mm-hmm. Because if we can persevere and learn through that moments like that, we start to realize maybe there's another path. Maybe there's something new that comes out of that. And I agree that those are the things so often that obviously it shows up in how resilient you become. The more you do those things, the more resilient you become. But there's a lot of actual beauty in that as well.
Yeah. And it seems to be the case that like so much of what generates happiness or unhappiness is actually changes in relative level. So like when life is getting worse or getting better, more so than life being in some like objective sense really good or really bad. And so it's counterintuitive, but you really have to look at like the first or second differential of where you are in life, and like how is my situation changing? How fast is it changing? And that's surprising, I think, until you go through a few of the oscillations.
And there's different. You said there's this relevant. I said relevance. You said relevant too. Component to it, but there's different levels, right? There is the my favorite restaurant didn't have the item on the menu I always eat today. That's disappointing. Then there's lose a job, health issue, and then there's moments that are truly desperation. And I watched your TED Talk where you talk about desperation. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid those moments. Not that you like headlong ran in and said, let's do it, but you found yourself in kind of a desperate spot.
Yeah, I think desperation is one of those things that I would not recommend to people, but I think it is an incredible catalyst for change. And something that you will hear in 12-step programs a lot is people talking about the gift of desperation. It's like when you reach a point in life where you are so dissatisfied, so unhappy, you really get this incredible fire in you to change your life. And it can be really hard to overcome the inertia of addiction or other ways of being stuck in life without that like intense impetus. And I think addiction is one of those things that can provide that. There are other healthier ones too, but like addiction does have that silver lining.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be something about it that that causes you to be able to say, like, I'm going to stand in front of people and say things that I've been hiding forever or unwilling to say. And there's got to be something freeing in that.
Totally. Yeah. I think the first time that people stand up in an AA meeting and say, my name is Cate, I'm an alcoholic or whatever it is, that is such a pivotal moment. I've never seen anybody get through that without crying. And it's because it is really overwhelming and also liberating to finally like live in truth, admit it freely to people. It's a beautiful thing.
It really is. As you have your new book coming out, you can just do things that you have coming out, how high agency people get what they want out of life. Let's talk a little bit about what does it mean to even be high agency?
Yeah. It's funny. It's a term that I see thrown around a lot, and it seems like everybody has a slightly different definition. The way that I think about it is sort of two-pronged. One is it's the capacity to both see and act on all of the degrees of freedom that life offers. And so there's a component of it that is just like being able to recognize things that seem like constraints at first, but are actually variables. And then there is the courage to like act on those degrees of freedom once recognized.
Yeah, because sometimes we feel like we stepped into this world that's already here and we're going to play by the rules it already has in place. And I mentioned Patterson earlier on, but he actually talks about this. He said when he started writing, people were like, well, you can't put out 3 books a year or 7 books a year. And he's like, who says I can't? And you have to write in these genres. He's like, where's the unwritten rule on that? You know, where are these things coming from and who says that they have to be true? And it was really his willingness in many ways to obviously he brings the talent to the table, but also to push against those things or to just even deny their very existence because guess what? Nobody came and arrested him at that moment and said, you can't do it. What is it that you learned like causes us to do that? Because I can think of some things that I have some self-imposed constraints around and probably some that I don't even realize that I probably need to figure out a way to get other people to point it out to me.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there are certain like psychological factors in this that cause us to strategically ignore certain possibilities. So one is I think that we're just social creatures, and when we are figuring out how to move through life early on, even later on, we're often like looking at the people around us and thinking like, what are they doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? And if you get a lot of your decision-making sort of secondhand, which I did for most of my life, it can be really easy to just like fall into a career path because then once you're like a lawyer, which is what I was, all the people around you are lawyers. All the people around you are gunning to make partner, to like work on like certain cases. And your concept of success becomes very limited. I think there's like a bunch of other psychological factors though too. One is it's embarrassing to switch tracks. It's embarrassing to like fail or be rejected or be seen being bad at things, all of which tend to accompany, at least initially, major changes. And so there's this like desire to avoid embarrassment, desire to have internal coherence in terms of an identity and a sense of self. Like, this is the type of person I am. These are the types of things that I do. I think it's like this cluster of psychological factors that conspires to keep people not paying attention to all of the options.
You know, it's funny. A few weeks ago, I interviewed on the podcast a young lady who she's the youngest North American female to hike Mount Everest. She did it at 18 years old. And she was just talking about striving for things in life early on. It was ingrained in her, athletically especially, but academically as well, to strive for things. So she did triathlons and climbed mountains. She's climbed lots of different mountains, climbed Denali and also, or McKinley now, and all, or McKinley, Denali, we'll see what they end up settling on next week. But all these different mountains and things like that. And then she went off to college and she started running at University of Southern California. And a couple years into it, she's like, I'm not enjoying this at all. And she decided to leave the team. And there's really something beautiful, as she talked about it, in quitting.
Yeah.
And I asked her specifically about, how did you deal with it? What was that process like? And she started to spell it out. She said her dad had said to her, if you're not enjoying it, you don't have to keep doing it. And she's like, I didn't even see that as a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have a real bias against quitting things, especially in American culture. And I think strategic quitting is actually a really critical skill and one that most people underindulge. I think that I've had an unusual and unusually satisfying life, primarily because I've been willing to throw in the towel on a lot of different things and move on to the next thing of interest.
Well, because I don't know, I look at it as I'm not quitting. I'm just freeing myself up to try something different. And maybe there's a bit of there's a stigma associated with it that in general. I was raised in a house, and many people where it's like, you don't quit, you just keep pushing through. Dad worked 38 years at the phone company, keep it going. But then I also saw my dad, after 38 years at the phone company, retire, and his going away present was a gold watch, no band. Just the watch. He had to go out and buy his own band. And I was kind of like, that's what you get from 38 years,
Yeah.
So there was that being formed as well. In the book, you talk about some things that I'd love to have you kind of riff on a bit for me, because I want to know a little bit more than the bullet I was able to read on it. Yeah. So one is like increasing your surface area for luck. Tell me more about that. I actually was listening to something the other day, and they were saying how some people see themselves as lucky, some people see themselves as not lucky. And there's a study that was done, maybe you've heard of this, maybe you wrote about it, where they tell people, count how many pictures are in this particular booklet. And as you start flipping through it, people are counting how many pictures are in there. And it actually tells you midway through, there are 47 pictures in this book. And the people who consider them not lucky, most of them would skip right over that and keep going. The people who consider themselves lucky actually picked it up and said, there's 47 pictures in here. So they have their eyes open to like what's coming to them.
Yeah. So this is I'm not the first person to come up with this concept. I think it's like the phrase, which I love, increasing your surface area for luck, has been floating around the tech community for a decade or so. But I think it's a really neat encapsulation of this idea, which is, I believe that like there is a ton of luck involved in outcomes in life. I think that's pretty clear if you look at the course of any individual's life, including very successful people, including very unsuccessful people. However, there seems to be a really big difference between people who sort of embrace that fact and go out and try to make as much contact with the world as possible in order to generate opportunities to get lucky, and people who become more like trapped in a narrative of, I'm not a lucky person. And I think that if you're simply like putting yourself out there, it's like networking is the most obvious example of this, but like writing on the internet, hosting events, all of the stuff, there are ways to simply take a lot of shots on goal in terms of like getting connected to people, having opportunities. And I think the people who are taking lots of shots on goal are way, way, way more likely to get lucky in life. And then looking back on it, you'll say, oh, it was luck, but there's a relationship there.
Is there any advice you have to people that say, okay, that makes sense, but it's kind of taking shots on goal. I might miss, it might not look good. I mean, all those things that play in our head. I mean, any advice you give to say, okay, here's a way you can start taking some more shots?
So I think that there are probably lower and higher rejection versions of this. So hosting events is a high rejection version of this, because you can try to host a big party and nobody can show up and that feels bad. Writing stuff on the internet is a lower rejection version of it, because like the worst thing that happens is you don't get a lot of shares or whatever it is. And then you write the next one and it doesn't feel that bad. So I think you can kind of like titrate your willingness to get rejected. I think the larger answer, though, is just to recognize that getting comfortable with being rejected is a skill. It's a skill that you can develop. Like there's no easy way around it, because it does just kind of suck at first. Yeah. But with time, it becomes so easy. Like I used to be so afraid of rejection. And now I do all sorts of bold, outlandish things, knowing that they're not going to work a lot of the time. And it's just fine. It doesn't like wound me internally to be rejected from things. And I really think that that is just exposure, and that most people are capable of making that shift.
We just got to put ourselves in those situations more.
Yeah.
So I've had my share of rejection and mess ups and public scrutiny over something I've written or shared on the internet, whatever it might be. And it does. But at the end of the day, sometimes I'm still like, but I'm human. And I've noticed as I was studying you do you leave the door pretty wide open for people to give you feedback in all sorts of ways.
I do. Yeah. I have an anonymous feedback box, which I really love. It's like the number one piece of advice that I give people when they're trying to increase their agency, and maybe like 2% of people will implement it. People really don't like to try it. But I have an anonymous feedback box that I set up like 4 years ago or so, and it's linked to all of my social media, my Substack, my personal website. It's just like, go here, write a message to me. And people reach out with all sorts of feedback. A lot of it is just people being nice. Occasionally it's people being mean, though that is like much more rare than you would think. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten some really, really good life-changing pieces of advice through that, where I think that it's just a fact that whoever the writer was clearly somebody who knew me and didn't feel comfortable giving it to me in person, because it's like a high friction kind of thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm just better off. I'm like a better manager and leader and dresser because of all of that stuff.
Did you say and dresser?
And dresser, yeah.
Maybe I need to open up one of those too. That's really funny. But yeah, I would imagine that. And I think I'm fairly open to feedback. I try to seek feedback. I catch myself sometimes saying, am I really acting for feedback here or a compliment? I mean, I try to be aware of that. And the older I get, the more I realize, okay, I'm gonna open myself up to this because it makes me better. So there's a lot of things that I've had to learn to do this, because I'll be honest with you, it did not come naturally for me. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I fell right into that people-pleasing mode pretty early on, and the desire to get people to tell me there's things I could do better or I was doing wrong, or what I would almost see as an affront. I actually wrote an article about this that actually got a fair amount of traction this week on LinkedIn, where I said when I was in the military years ago, we would go out on deployments, and I was gone for a couple months kind of on a no-notice deployment. And I came back, and my wife told me, it's easier when you're not here than when it is when you are here. Yeah. And I got defensive and I pushed back, and I probably wasn't the best. I was made it harder to be with me in that moment. Yeah. Because I was processing through it all. But we've been married 35 years now. She had something worth saying, and I needed to listen to it then. It just took me some time. And even then, it's kind of like, well, I'll squirrel that away and not need to share that with the world. But then over the years, you realize, you know what? Other people need to hear that. And that's exactly what people told me, is they needed to hear it. But sometimes feedback is hard.
It's definitely hard. It's definitely an acquired taste. And I think it's something that I've become increasingly obsessed with as I get older, is like squeezing that value out of feedback that I get, and also developing like really high trust, high feedback personal relationships. So like my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my close friends, people that I work very closely with. I try in all of these relationships, to the extent humanly possible, to encourage really open lines of feedback. And I think that has been a huge benefit.
Yeah, because what happens if you don't give the feedback or get that feedback? I mean, quite frankly, if my wife hadn't said that to me, things were going to naturally get better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It was just going to grow and kind of fester and show up in other ways. Another thing you talk about in the book is this idea of taking every shortcut available. Is this like life hack type of thing? Is this, hey, AI is going to do this for me? Is it like, yeah, those are both available? I mean, what do you mean by that?
I think those are both examples of what I'm talking about. So I think that we We live in a culture that is suspicious of taking shortcuts. Like you hear the phrase taking shortcuts and it sort of has an inherently negative tint to it or something. You see
Well, yeah,
this.
I mean, there's bucks out there. This is a second
Yeah.
mountain climbing reference, but there's books up there like, there's no shortcuts to the top. It's the name
Yeah.
of the book, right? I'm like,
Right.
well, there's a helicopter. People might not like it, but you can get there.
Yeah, so like you see this in the discourse around weight loss drugs like Ozempic, and other sort of like biohacking stuff that is happening, where it's considered like bad, bordering on immoral to take shortcuts. And I think this is like one of the things that really characterizes the high agency people in my life is this recognition that there are a million different things that you might want to pursue in life. All of those things require some expenditure of energy. Like nothing really comes for free. And so reducing the amount of willpower or like cognitive load that you need to spend on one thing just frees up that energy to be spent on something else. And the people that I know who I think most exemplify this are always thinking, how do I get whatever the result is that I'm aiming for with the least amount of effort possible, just so that I can then free up those effort points to do something else that I really care about.
Do you think it's a function of that they realize that that particular thing is just a means to some other end, as opposed to people haven't thought it? I don't know. You tell me. I mean, they haven't thought it all the way through to where actually they're trying to go, and this might be part of the journey, and I can learn from it. But actually, I'm trying to get to this thing. I'm not just trying to get to point B. I'm trying to get to point Q.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's not like I think effort is never bad. I think there are a lot of activities where effort and sort of like grindy determination are, in a sense, the thing that is relevant. It's like there are cases where the journey is the destination. Or the destination is no, what am I saying? I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say. And then there are cases where it's like, no, I just need to get to the grocery store and the journey isn't really the point. I just need to like check this off my list so that I can go back to writing the book that I'm working on or doing the other like high value thing where the process is actually part of the value.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talk about there's the idea of helping your commitments along the way happen by putting some forcing functions in place.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there's some things where it's like I can figure out how to move from point A to point B quicker, but then there's going to be other times where point B to point C, I left to my own devices, I may not get there if I don't have some things that I've put in place. Not that I don't have agency, but my agency might lead me to a choice where I decide I'm going to sit on the couch for a while, and that's a choice I can make just as much as I can get to, roll up my sleeves and get to work at that moment. So what do you mean by forcing functions in that case?
So forcing functions are like the canonical example is like Odysseus sailing past the sirens, where he has his men like tie him up and put wax in their ears, and it's like placing constraints on yourself at an earlier point in time that will lead to wise action later in time. So it is like restricting degrees of freedom to a sense, but in service of your larger goals. So when applied to other stuff, I think about it as like you are consistently looking for ways to make achieving your goals easier than not achieving your goals. And a lot of that is just like instituting things, forcing functions that will entail some sort of pain if you fail to do the thing that you're trying to commit to. Making a bet with a friend that you will write on Substack frequently is an example. Accepting an advance from a publisher is a much larger bet. I felt that one while we were writing the book. Marriage is a great example of this, where I think my relationship with my husband developmentally progressed much faster and got a lot further because we approached the relationship from the perspective of, we're going to get married. Let's get married. We got married, pretty fast. And now we have to make it work. And having that like socially enforced container of, we're publicly committed to each other, we're going to make it really high stakes to split up, I think that caused us to really invest in the relationship in a way that we might not otherwise have.
It seems like there could be a bit of a paradox in people's mind between, at least as I listen to it, the idea of, and I get what you're saying about this, that I have agency, I have tremendous agency, but at the same time, I can put these limitations on the degrees of freedom that I can choose. I'm choosing to put those in place, so they're showing my agency there. But I mean, is almost a paradox. Like, you're telling me to use my agency effectively, I need to kind of reduce the choices I'm allowing myself to take.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you can think about it as just like you having different identities almost at different slices of time, and like past you and future you might have one goal in mind, but like current you doesn't want to do the thing, and you're trying to force the part of you that is currently going through the motions to like keep going. Yeah, but I think with a lot of this stuff, there aren't like really clear, hard and fast rules for increasing your personal agency, which is one of the things that made writing the book challenging. There are instead like strategies that you can deploy at different times, some of which look like using more effort and like straining harder against the world, and some of which look like using less effort and sitting back and relaxing into the flow of life. And it's kind of like, I use the analogy of like, if you are a fighter, if you're a boxer, thinking about I do defense versus I do offense doesn't really make sense. It's like you are responding in real time to the conditions of the match or the game of life, and different strategies make sense at different times.
That does make sense as you're going through it. And I just think about the dance that sometimes goes in my own head. I have some things that are like become conditioned in me that I've chose to put in place that I would say are probably forcing functions in various ways. I mean, a simple one is I travel a lot. I'm on the road every week. I have unless I'm getting in really late at night or don't have time, or have to go to a dinner or something like that, or choose to go to a dinner or something like that. But normally if I'm like going to my room and I'm going to be there for a little while, one of my forcing functions I put in place is I set my alarm for 5 minutes, and I've got 5 minutes to get my stuff unpacked and get the heck out of the room. Because hopefully go to the gym, but do something, because if I don't, boy, that couch in bed or a call in and that TV comes on, and I just know that about thyself. So there's sometimes I just have to save myself from myself.
That's a great example. Yeah, I really like that.
So one thing your publisher told me as I was looking into this, your book, You Can Just Do Things, that there's this idea, and hopefully I get this out of me the right way. So just work with me as I ask this question, because I'm kind of forming it as I go along. But you talk about using your deepest insecurities as fuel for growth. And I would suggest that you have a unique background. Not everybody has a unique background, but yours has some really interesting components to it that are definitely unique in regards to an attorney who's arguing cases at the highest level, the number one female poker player in the world. That alone is like enough to talk about for a long, long time. Drug addiction issues, right? And falling prey to that. Then on the other hand, starting up a company and launching a pharmaceutical like faster than other people do through the trial process, and then taking over and leading this philanthropy. I mean, these are big different things. And I'm just wondering, somebody could look at all these and say, well, that's the high point and that's the low point pretty easily. But for you, as you look back through it, what were some of the sources in those different roles that you were playing or experiencing that were your deepest insecurities?
Oh, that's really interesting. So I want to redirect the question a little bit to sort of the phase of life that I'm in right now. So when I think about deep insecurities being a tool for growth, what I'm thinking about is I have this concept that it's not my concept. Other people have had this concept too, that each of us has some core fear, and there are many different types, that dictates to a large extent the types of strategies for life that are available to us mentally. And so, your core fear can be, mine is being seen as selfish. It can be fear of boredom, fear of not being loved, not being seen as valuable. I think for each one of us, there's some some one of those that more than anything else we want to avoid. And I think if you can identify that, because you have been avoiding thinking about that dimension of life for so long, it can be really easy to like get a lot of leverage out of that. And so for me, like the part of life that I'm in right now is I've been working in philanthropy for nonprofits on like public service stuff for a long time. And I have never allowed myself to consider making serious money because of my fear of being selfish. And so this is my growth edge right now as I'm thinking about, I'm on sabbatical until after the book comes out. But once that happens, I'm thinking about what my next thing is going to be. And like admitting to myself, I actually want to make money and I want to be financially stable has been a surprising growth edge for me and has opened up a lot of considerations that might not have been on the table.
That makes sense, because there's that thing, as I hear you saying it, there's that thing that kind of psychologically we locked away, or we don't want to, we don't want to go there. That's almost the third rail. And if somebody close to us knows it, they can almost manipulate us a little bit with it.
Totally.
So if we don't want to do it, I don't want to look at it, I don't want to talk about that thing. I also don't realize that there's opportunity to learn from that thing if I'm willing to do the hard work of opening the door up and looking at it.
There's something I want to like throw out a reference to, which I hope is not like unduly salesy. I made a quiz on my website. My website is just my name, catehall.com. I made a quiz that's up there now, which is like, because I got asked this question a lot, like, how do you find what this fear is for you and how do you respond to it if you know that? And so I worked on this quiz that is like, it helps people identify which of these fears is really the one that is driving their decision making, and then recommends like specific exercises from the book that will help respond to that. And I'm really proud of it. I think it's a really good quiz. And so I like referring people to that, but it's just a fun thing to do.
And we'll put the link. We'll put the link in, because you're Cate with a C.
With a C,
yeah. I'm actually going to do that because I think I know what it is for me. That it's like touching an exposed nerve in my mouth when you hit it, when somebody hits it. So I know it's the one, and it's probably the one I feed into the most. And it's probably the one that in my own mind I'll talk to that one, and it's probably the one that's most influenced by my childhood. So there's probably a grounding in this thing. So but let's check that out at catehall.com. So Cate, congratulations on the book. I'm excited. I'm excited to read the entire thing. You can just do things by Cate Hall with, is it Sasha Chapman?
Sasha Chapin. Yeah, it's my husband.
Oh, okay. Sasha Chapin. Yeah. I guess you know Sasha pretty well then.
Yeah, I know him pretty well.
So let me ask you this. As we wrap up the conversation, we have a question we ask every guest, like a lot of podcasts do, but this one might kind of hit you from left field a little bit, in a good way, I think. Okay. So I talk about disruption, I write about disruption, I work with clients on disruption, and then I, like everybody else, fall into routine and aren't even willing to disrupt myself, because my goodness, it could cause one small, tiny, not so great experience. And that is going out and buying a coffee. I have a particular place that I'll buy coffee. They're out of your part of the world, generally, a little bit north of you, but they're up in the Seattle area. They have a green mermaid on all their stores, and you can love it, you can like it, you can hate it, whatever. It's consistent. I go out every time I travel, I just go to that place. My producer, Jess, on the podcast said, my goodness, Patrick, how can you talk about disruption and not even disrupt that? So I decided to pursue the perfect vanilla latte, which really is everywhere I travel, to try something different, take a photo of trying it or whatever. And it has kind of opened my eyes to other things, which is good. So my question for you is there a perfect drink that you are in the pursuit of or you have found?
Oh, wow. The perfect drink I have found is Grant Akatz, who runs Alinea in Chicago, came up with this. It's like a recipe book for non-alcoholic cocktails, and they're all incredibly involved because he's like a molecular gastronomy guy. But there is a non-alcoholic margarita in there that is like, my husband makes it for me for special occasions. It is pretty much the best thing I've ever tasted, no notes. So I would recommend that to people.
All right, got it. And it's Grant Acott, you said? I'll
Yeah.
find it and put that in the link as well, so
Okay.
people can check that out if they want to give that a try. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations on all the success leading up to the book. I know it's going to do really well, and I think it's going to help a lot of people think through agency and kind of moving beyond, as we talk about it. It's systemic things that won't allow me to use my agency, or it hasn't been demonstrated for me before. I don't even see what's actually possible because I've become more and more narrow by the people I surround myself with and the things I bring in. Hopefully this will help open up people's minds. Not that some of these other things aren't true. It's just that there's a reality that maybe there's some more truth out there that we can dig into a little bit. So Cate, thanks so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, that's a wrap. Thanks to Cate Hall for joining me today to talk about her new book, You Can Just Do Things: How High Agency People Get What They Want Out of Life. That book is out July 2026. I encourage you to check it out. You can also go to her website, catehall.com, Cate with a C, CATEHALL.com, and learn more about her work, and even take the assessment that she shared in the conversation today. I hope you really enjoyed the conversation. I certainly did. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. Now go disrupt for good.